There is a specific kind of silence that only happens at 3 in the morning, a silence so heavy that you can actually hear the blood pulsing in your own ears. I was sitting at my desk with the lamp dimmed low, staring at the notebook that had become my only confidant over the last 6 months. I didn't write about my day or my crushes. Instead, I wrote about the things that scared me, the dark scenarios that kept me awake. I thought that by putting the fear onto paper, I was locking it away where it couldn't hurt me. But as I looked at the wet ink of my latest entry, I heard the unmistakable sound of a floorboard creaking in the hallway, a sound that matched the exact sentence I had just finished writing. The terror didn't hit me all at once. Rather, it trickled down my spine like ice water because I realized that the back door shouldn't have been unlocked. I remembered writing. The shadow moved through the kitchen because the latch had been left open, and my heart hammered against my ribs as I wondered if my imagination was bleeding into reality or if something much worse was happening. I sat perfectly still, my hands still gripping the pen so hard that my knuckles were white, listening for the sound of breathing through the thin wood of my bedroom door. Every night for a week, I had been writing these short, twisted vignettes about a man who watched a house from the tree line. I had described his jacket, a faded yellow rain slicker that smelled of old grease, and I had described the way he dragged his left foot just slightly when he walked. Yesterday, I found a scrap of yellow fabric caught on the rose bushes beneath my window, and today, I saw a single, dragged footprint in the mud by the porch. It felt like I was writing a script and some invisible actor was following the cues, waiting for the climax of the story to finally reveal himself to me. I turned off my desk lamp, plunging the room into a thick, suffocating darkness that made the shadows in the corner seem to stretch and reach toward me. I reached out and touched the diary, feeling the texture of the leather cover, wondering if I should rip the pages out or if that would only make the ending come faster. If I wrote that he left, would he disappear, or had I already given him too much power by acknowledging his presence in the first place? The house felt different tonight, smaller and more fragile, as if the walls were made of paper that he could just rip through whenever he decided the scene was ready. Then, the scratching started, a slow and rhythmic sound against the exterior siding of the house, right outside my second-story window. It sounded exactly like the description I had written 2 hours ago. He used a rusted nail to mark the wood, carving his initials into the side of the house while the boy inside trembled. I felt a sob rising in my throat, but I forced it down because I knew that any sound I made would be an invitation for him to finish what I had started. I crawled across the floor, staying low to avoid being seen through the glass, and reached for my phone on the nightstand only to find the screen dark and unresponsive. I remembered then, with a jolt of pure adrenaline, that in my story the boy's phone had died because the charger had been snipped in the basement. I scrambled to the cord and pulled it up, seeing the clean, sharp cut through the plastic wire that confirmed my worst fears were actually happening. I wasn't just a writer anymore. I was a victim trapped in a plot of my own making, and the antagonist was currently standing on the other side of a thin pane of glass. I looked at the diary lying on the desk, the white pages glowing faintly in the moonlight, and I realized I had one chance to change the ending before he broke through. I fumbled for the pen in the dark, my fingers shaking so violently that I nearly dropped it, and I felt my way to the last page I had written. I didn't need to see the lines to know where the story stopped, right at the moment where the man reaches for the window latch. I pressed the pen to the paper, the ink dragging heavily as I tried to write something, anything, that would provide me with a way out of this nightmare. I wrote, "The boy found the heavy metal crowbar under his bed, the one his father had left there after fixing the floor. Even though I knew there was no crowbar under my bed, I reached my hand under the bed frame, my fingers brushing against the cold dust of the hardwood floor, praying that the logic of the diary would hold true just one more time. My heart nearly stopped when my hand collided with something cold, hard, and unmistakably metallic lying right where I had written it would be. I pulled the heavy tool out, the weight of it giving me a flicker of hope, but then I heard the sound of the window glass shattering and the heavy thud of a man landing on my carpet. The smell of old grease filled the room, and I realized that while I could write the weapons into existence, I couldn't write away the man who was now standing 3 feet away from me. The overhead light in the interrogation room didn't flicker like it does in the movies. Instead, it hummed with a low, constant frequency that felt like it was drilling directly into my skull. I sat with my hands tucked under my thighs to keep them from shaking, staring at the black leather-bound diary that sat in the middle of the metal table. Detective Miller hadn't said a word for 10 minutes. He just leaned back in his chair and watched me with eyes that were as cold and unmoving as marbles. He knew exactly what was in those pages because he was the one who had raided my bedroom at 4 in the morning, tossing my mattress and tearing down my posters until he found my hiding spot behind the loose baseboard. I had started writing those stories because my life was boring and I wanted to feel something, anything, other than the suffocating routine of high school and chores. I wrote about crimes that happened in our town, but I added my own twists, imagining what the killer was thinking or how the evidence was hidden in places the police were too stupid to look. It was a game, a private way to flex my brain, but looking at Miller's stony expression, I realized the game had turned into a trap that was closing around my neck. The silence in the room was a physical weight, making it hard to breathe, and I knew that every second I stayed quiet, I looked more like the monster I had described in Chapter 4. Miller finally reached forward, his thick fingers tracing the edge of the diary as he flipped it open to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. He began to read out loud, his voice a gravelly monotone that made my own words sound like a death warrant. The body is buried where the old creek meets the property line of the abandoned mill, under the roots of the willow tree that looks like a weeping skeleton, he recited. Then he looked up and smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. He told me that they had sent a team to the mill an hour ago and they had found exactly what I had described, a shallow grave containing the remains of Sarah Jenkins, who had been missing for 3 weeks. My heart stopped, and for a moment, I forgot how to speak or even how to think because I had never been to the abandoned mill in my entire life. I had made that location up because it sounded atmospheric, a perfect setting for a horror story, and now the detective was telling me that my fiction was a factual map to a crime scene. I tried to tell him that it was just a coincidence, a horrible and impossible stroke of luck, but the words died in my throat when I saw the photos he spread across the table. They were shots of the crime scene, and the way the body was positioned matched the detailed sketches I had drawn in the margins of my diary perfectly. "How did you know about the ribbon, Leo?" Miller asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as he leaned over the table until I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. I looked at the photo and saw a blue silk ribbon tied around the victim's wrist, a detail I had written into my diary just last Tuesday night during a thunderstorm. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me because I knew I hadn't killed anyone, but the evidence sitting on that table said otherwise, and there was no logical way to explain how my imagination was predicting real murders. I started to wonder if I was sleepwalking, or if I had some kind of split personality that took over when the sun went down, but deep down, I knew the truth was even more terrifying. The high tension of the night began to peak as Miller pulled out a tape recorder and set it between us, the red light glowing like a predatory eye. He told me that if I confessed now, he would talk to the DA about avoiding the death penalty. But if I kept lying, he would make sure I never saw the sun again. I looked at the diary, my mind racing through the pages I had written, trying to remember if I had mentioned anything else that might be happening right now. I remembered writing a scene where the lights in the police station go out and the prisoner is snatched from the room by the real killer who has been hiding in the vents. Just as that thought crossed my mind, the hum of the overhead light suddenly cut out, plunging the interrogation room into a darkness so thick I couldn't even see my own hands. I heard Miller curse and the sound of his chair scraping against the floor as he reached for his flashlight. But then there was a different sound, a soft metallic click from the ceiling. I sat frozen in the chair, my pulse thundering in my ears, wondering if my diary was about to save me or if the person who was actually committing these crimes was coming to finish the story I had started. The curiosity was killing me, a burning need to know who was out there and how they were reading my private thoughts before the ink was even dry. Was someone watching me through my window every night, reading over my shoulder as I poured my darkest fantasies onto the paper? Or was I being framed by someone who knew exactly how to use my own creativity against me to clear their own path? I heard a heavy thud as something landed on the floor behind Miller, and the detective's flashlight beam swept across the room, illuminating a figure dressed in the exact outfit I had described for the villain in my final entry. I realized then that I wasn't the narrator of the story anymore. I was just a character, and the person standing in the shadows held the pen. They didn't want me to go to jail. They wanted me to be the witness to their masterpiece, a living testament to the horrors I had dreamed up. As the figure moved toward the detective, I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, and a voice whispered in my ear that I should start writing the next chapter immediately if I wanted to stay alive. The danger was no longer on the pages of my diary. It was standing right behind me, and the only way to survive the night was to keep the story going, no matter how many people had to die in the process.